Well, welcome to the Reach Australia Learning Labs. This Learning Lab is all about growth barriers for church planters. The vision of Reach Australia is to see thousands of healthy, evangelistic, multiplying churches across Australia. And so in the next 10 years, we want to see 200 new churches started. We want to see them launched successfully, strongly, and push past growth barriers. We also want to see lots of established churches also get healthy so they move towards church planting. So this is a really important topic for the network as a whole. Now, Craig Tucker, let me introduce Craig.
Hey, everyone.
Craig has planted multiple times. He's what's called a serial church planter, a little bit unique.
Sounds like a serial killer. It doesn't sound good. Yeah.
Doesn't sound good. His last church plant is actually here in this building, Scott's Church, in the middle of Sydney. It's a city centre church. In the city, for the city, is the vision of Scott's Church. Craig, you've been through a number of sort of growth barriers. What's your favourite size church, if you could sort of be there and stay there?
I think they're fun at every stage, and to be honest, I think I can enjoy the benefits of stages at churches at each stage. But I'm aware that's not true for everyone, and at each you have people who love small church, and when church gets bigger, it actually doesn't work for them. They're just not wired to be able to deal with it, and maybe they're better going somewhere else and helping start something new again. Other people, small church kills them, and they're really wired. They'll thrive in a large church setting. And we really want to say there's no right size for church. In fact, reaching Australia will probably mean planting some big churches that send other churches. But it means there's a lot of places where we need to plant smaller sized churches. And maybe we grow by staying small in some places and in some contexts and cultural groups by planting lots of small churches. So as long as we're reaching Australia, it doesn't matter what size the churches are.
Great. Excellent. Well, as I said, today we're going to have two teaching blocks. Craig is going to talk about how churches grow. We're going to spend some time in our first block talking about that. He's going to talk about the importance of bandwidth, so thinking through your own bandwidth. And we're not going to get time to cover this, but character is really important as we think about growth barriers in a church plant. So I'm going to hand it over to Craig to teach about growth barriers.
Well, first thing we'll talk about is that churches grow in quantum leaps. I think we've got some slides that are going to come up. Tom's going to put up for us. Is that, yeah. So yeah, churches grow in quantum leaps. That'll be our first topic. And then as Scott alluded, the other two things we are or would like to talk about are there. So I just want to really let you, we really need to understand that growing a church isn't like doing a chicken curry. Kathy and I have a great chicken curry recipe when there's two of us. And when we have 20 people over, all I have to do is multiply the ingredients by 10 and just put it all in the pot and it tastes great. You just increase the ingredients. Church growth isn't like that. Church and the way you lead church needs to significantly change in style as you go through quantum leaps. It's not just a matter of putting out more chairs, starting more groups, and turning up the PA system as church gets bigger. You operate in a completely different way. So let's think about that for a minute. Most of you have probably heard about Dunbars number. Slide, Tom. Dunbar talked about what's the number of relationships an individual can have until they cease to think like they know everyone well. And that number's about 150, according to Dunbar. But it really changes. It changes because of transience. If you're in a small country town where everyone grew up with each other, then because you know each other and you see each other in lots of different contexts, church can grow to 200 before you have that feeling that Dunbar talked about of not really knowing each other. Likewise, if people are really similar to each other and have had similar experiences, if you church plant and you want to reach second generation Korean university students in Australia, they all have such a similar experience, similar cultural background, they connect with each other so easily, they can grow to about 200. But if you're in a place where there's lots of transients, like a city context, if you're in a place where there's great diversity of people, you're going to hit Dunbar's 150 number. You're going to feel like you hit it well before 100. So if we go to the next slide, Tom, just think about it not so much as a number, as an effect. What are the things you want to look for to think, okay, we're hitting this crucial barrier in how church works? What are the symptoms that you're approaching Dunbar's barrier? And the kind of things is that people feel like they're not connected to each other. So as the pastor, they'll be saying things to you. Church here used to feel welcoming and warm, but now it doesn't. And you used to have lots of time for us when we were small, but you seem like you're busy with other people now. What have I done to offend you? People's experience of it is that church feels more distant. As the leader, the way you do church doesn't work anymore. And so your leadership structures, your leadership meetings get longer and longer because you're dealing with the same kinds of stuff, but there's just more of it. And unless you divest stuff off the key leadership group, you'll burn your leaders out. People who are doing welcoming and other ministries, the way it used to work no longer works. And so you start to see burnout in your key lay leaders. But also, recruitment works a certain way when you're small. You kind of know everyone, but when you don't know everyone well, you start to make miscues in who you put into roles. And so you find yourself having to appoint people and then unappoint them. You find you appoint people and things really fall apart because you picked the wrong person and you don't have time to train them anymore. So all sorts of symptoms start to happen at that crucial kind of 150, maybe in Australian contexts. We should think about it more as typically a 100 barrier. Again, culturally, Americans connect better in large groups. Australians don't connect as well. And I think that, again, lowers the kind of number where you'll start to hit the Dunbar effect. So next slide, Tom. Just want to think about what that means let me just say, Dunbar's number isn't the only number to think about. There's a number of key crucial numbers in how human beings operate. Firstly, the number that's 2 to 8, that's the number that fits around a kitchen table or is in a car or is in a board, but before the board or the committee ceases to function well, where you're highly connected, everyone gets to speak. We all know our most important conversations in life, we've either had them around the kitchen table or in the family car. We know how that size group operates, and it's a really important unit. Even as church gets bigger, you need to continue to have somewhere where people have that kind of experience at church. The other crucial number as groups grow is the classroom size. We've all been socialised for 12 years in what works in a classroom of about 25 and starts to break down when you get to 30. And we all know what the teacher can get away with and do and what they can't in the classroom, what won't work at the school assembly, but will work in the classroom. Then there's the Dunbars grouping. I'm going to say up to 120 in our context, where the pastor knows the congregation. And then beyond that, something interesting happens at about 350. Up to 350, even if I don't know your name, I recognise your face when I see you in another context, or I recognise your face when I sit next to you and I know you're part of our school or you're part of our company or our organisation. I know your face, even if I don't know anything about you. But over 350, up to 350 that works, over 350, it's really about a shared identity. So I see you in the street and we've both got the Sydney Swans jersey on. I say, hey, good on you, that's great. I've never met you before, but there's something that connects us. We have a shared mission or cause. So if your church is over 350, it's the shared mission that holds your church together. It's not community, it's a large group. You will need groups of 2 to 8. You will still need small groups. You may well need groups up to 25 and groups up to 120 in people's experience. But if you don't have a really clear vision that people want to turn up to church for, it doesn't matter what else you've got going for you after 350. Next slide, Tom. So just to sort of put some examples and some flesh on that if I can we progress that, Tom? Yeah, there we go. If you think about how people join a church up to 25, if I've got a church of 25 and you join my church, we're meeting in a classroom somewhere, what would you expect that experience to be like? Well, you'd expect to meet the minister on the morning, right? You expect to have a conversation with me. You'd probably expect to meet everyone and everyone to come up and say, hello, really glad you're here. if in that group, that church of 25, you turned up for the first week and I kind of looked around in the group, making eye contact with no one in particular, and I said, hey, if there's anyone who's new here this morning, it's really great you're here. And if you'd like to make yourself known at the welcome desk at the end of church, we'd really love to help you connect with things. We instinctively know in a group of 25 that that's a really weird way to do things. A church of 25 should not have big church practice and start acting like they're a mega church. But as you grow bigger, you need to anticipate what's required and grow to the next step. Likewise, Tom, can we have the next slide? That's okay. Likewise, when it comes to how decisions get made, in a group of up to 25, everyone gets consulted on a big decision. Once you get to 120, that starts to change. Once you get to 350, lots of things are made top down, but they need to be sold well, and persuasion becomes more important than democracy. And the next one's on Tom is aesthetics are really important as church grows. No one comes to a church of 25 because the singing's great. They come because they're welcomed and they're known by the pastor. But as church changes, the aesthetics really need to change. You really need to get this one, I think, in thinking about how things work. So I want you to imagine that you're the pastor of a church of 25, and Billy had started turning up to church 3 weeks ago. He became a Christian 1 week ago, and he's turned up a bit earlier than everyone else, and he says to you, hey, I was so moved by the passage last week, I've written a song. It's only got 2 chords, and the third verse I'm still working on it. There's a lot of la, la, la. But I'd love to sing my song for the group. If you're the pastor of a church of 25, what are you going to say? Well, I hope you're saying, yes, I really want Billy to sing his song. But imagine you're the pastor of a church of 250, and you know Billy, he's actually in your small group. He's become a Christian last week. Just as church is about to start, you've done the sound check, you've prayed together with the key people on stage. Billy comes up and says, I've written my song. It's 2 chords. There's a lot of la, la, la. Can I sing my song in church today? I hope as the pastor of a 250 church, you're saying, no, Billy, we can't do that, but I'd love you to sing it in our small group of 2 to 8. Now, the reason you're going to say yes and no to Billy is because in a church of 25, everybody knows Billy. And the reason it's great to get him to sing his song is not because the music's going to be high quality, the lyrics are going to be profound, they probably won't be, but because we all know Billy and we love the fact that his shoddy song is being sung because of what it says about his story. In the church of 250, we don't all know Billy. So I'm sitting there watching Billy sing his song on the stage and thinking, gee, I'm glad I didn't bring my non-Christian friend today. And actually, I'm not going to bring him next week, because if the leaders let this guy on here this week, what are they going to do next week? I don't know Billy, so I have a completely different reaction. I even want to say, even if Billy gets a chance to tell his story and give his testimony and then sing his song, I'm still not really excited about it because I know about Billy, but I don't know Billy. So I hope that makes the point. Aesthetics really matter as church is less about everyone knowing each other and more about other things happening. Tom, if we can go to the next slide and the next slide. The really crucial thing to ask is, why do people come at this church size and why do they stay? So Tom, if we could put up all the transitions on this page, that'd be great. Small group, it's really intimate connection with the leader, your launch team. 25, it's really about community and knowing everyone. Preaching is almost irrelevant at this point. Sorry to let you know that. At 25 to 150, it's about knowing the pastor and knowing the key people and feeling you know everyone. Preaching starts to matter, and that's why people come and stay. Over 120, it really becomes about the quality of the preaching and the music and the aesthetics. And it's no longer about whether people know each other because they don't know each other well. You will need to have a small group network where people can feel like they know each other. At 120, it doesn't really matter. But by the time you get to about 200, if you don't have a small group network that's really working, well, you find out about it, because all of the Dunbar factors, all of those kind of complaints and issues start to rise to the surface. Over 350, this might not sit well for our stable, but preaching is less important and vision is the most important thing. If you can imagine going to an evangelical version of Hillsong, you'd want the preaching to be good, but the reason you're going to turn up at a church of that size is because there's a vision to evangelize and reach a city, and that's the thing that actually excites you and keeps you engaged with things there. So different churches need different sizes. Time to stop for questions.
Great, that was really helpful. Really good question coming in from Paul Young. Like every church planter, he wants to sort of count every person in the room, even babies in utero. Dunbar's number, is that just for adults, or how do kids, babies, in utero babies impact that number?
Yeah, look, I guess I want to say, Paul, it's a great question. It really depends on how you deal with kids at church. Are they sitting in church for the whole time? Are they don't even get in the front door. They're off to some other room before things even start. How are they thought of at church? Those things actually matter in how the number works as I look at different churches. So what I want to say is, look for the symptoms of the Dunbar effect. Don't think about a number. So as soon as you get to 25, you need to start anticipating that at some point you're going to hit the Dunbar barrier, and you need to start practicing and gearing up for a slightly larger size of church practice. You need to start gearing up for the quantum leap even before you hit the quantum leap. And while you're doing that, you're watching for the symptoms that it's coming.
That's excellent. Craig, you sort of follow up around a similar vein there. When do you start to communicate, talk with the church about these growth barriers? You're in a building here in Sydney where you can probably have 700 people, pre-COVID in the facility. When do you start talking about? When do you start talking about the fact that we're going to be a church of 700 reaching the city?
Yeah, so I think you set your vision in different ways in different contexts, but I think what you want to do from a launch team stage onwards is normalize the fact that you're going to grow and things are going to change. So normalize the fact that if we're going to grow, sacrifice will come. And I don't think you need to talk in lots of detail about what the changes are, but to say, we have it's great to know each other in our group of 15, 20, praying together. This is a special time. Remember this. Our prayer is that we won't feel like this soon. That will actually grow. And whether you're going to grow to a certain size and plant off, or whether you're going to grow, either way, you want to create that and normalize that expectation that ministry involves sacrifice and involves change. Yep.
Great. Excellent. Duncan has got a question on the intersection of growth barriers and Dunbar's effect and church planning. That is, when is it effective to send out a church plant or actually to stay and not go?
Okay, so Duncan, is your question, give me a nod, how big do we have to grow before we church plant? Yeah, okay, yes, good, yeah. And it's also the question you want to ask is, at Drummoyne, we started we had a morning congregation, we started 10:30, and then we went to 6 o'clock, and I didn't play it well. All of our key players went to 6 o'clock, and we almost killed 10:30, even though we didn't send that many people, the kind of people we sent. So I think I want to say it all depends on what church planning model you're using. So in some contexts, you see people church plant with 15 people. Sometimes they've got a model where they need 50. It all depends on how many people do you need to run the existing setup you've got. And it depends on who it is who's going as much as how many there are. So if you can develop leaders and you've got an overflow of leaders, you can church plant earlier at a smaller number. But if you've grown to 200 and you haven't brought the only leaders you got are the ones you started with, then you're not ready to church plant. Because it's not just about having how many bodies you've got to carve off, but who's going to lead them, or who's going to stay and help the mother church to survive and keep going.
Really helpful to just get your reflections as well on, launching another congregation, at the same site. So how do growth barriers sort of, how are they impacted when you start, say, a morning congregation if you're in the Arvo or vice versa?
Yeah. So I'm going to keep saying the same thing, which is that it all depends on how that works. In some places, people plan a second service, and if you ask people, what church are you part of, they say, I'm 6 o'clock at Drummoyne. And they've never been at 10:30. And when they start having kids, they don't think about going to 10:30 at Drummoyne. They say, let's look around at the different churches in our area that have kids, morning congregations, because they have no identity beyond the local service they're part of. In other places, they feel like their main identity is the bigger group, and they do weekends away, and they do lunches, and they lots of things together. So it'll vary depending on what's the expectation of who they feel they should know. And again, so look for the Dunbar effects and symptoms. Don't think about a number, is what
Great, really helpful.
Yep.
If you're not very self-aware as a leader, and not great at picking up
Are
these
you having a
symptoms.
go at me, Scott?
No, I'm
Okay,
talking about me.
So, yeah.
If you're like me, and you have trouble seeing those things, what are some tips you can have for actually identifying those symptoms?
Yeah, okay. So once self-awareness is probably about what the growth barrier is doing to you as a church, as a leader, and there will be some things there. You will go through a crisis. There'll be the Sunday will come where people came, you preached, they left, and you think, were Bill and Mary actually there? And you've got to the stage where you don't actually know anymore. And you might feel like, I'm no longer a caring pastor because I don't know who's there and who's not there. And if you need to have systems in place where you can work those kind of things out. So there will be impacts on you, but the major impacts will be people complaining to you and having a go at you. So your self-awareness needs to be about saying, when people say, so Scott, when we were in the launch team, you acted like I was your best friend, and now you act like you don't have any time for me at all. What have I done wrong? At that point, you could get really defensive, or you could say to yourself, I think I know what's happening here. We're round about the right number. We're hitting that Dunbar effect. And it's not really about them or me. It's really about church has got to a size where the way we used to do things is not the way we need to do them now.
Great. Pull out that slide. Be aware of what the next growth barrier is. Mark's asked a really good question. In the example of Billy around aesthetics, you're really giving us that tension of excellence and participation. You really want people to be involved, but can you give us some more examples of aesthetics outside of someone standing up and sharing their song?
And sharing their song. Yeah, so I think I was giving you an example of that with preaching. I want everyone to be a faithful preacher, right? Even if you're preaching to 4 people. But the reality is you're up to a certain size, particularly up to 25, and to some extent up to 120, you can have really dodgy PowerPoint. You can be really clunky in your preaching. And if people have a sense that you love them, they're going to keep coming. And they're going to bring their friends. And they say, you should come to church because we're a group of people where Jesus is really turning us into people who love each other. And I want you to taste that. So preaching is probably the biggest example where if you've got a church of 20 and you're spending your whole week trying to get something that makes you sound like Matt Chandler, you're not doing what you need to be doing at that stage. The point will come where you need to give it more effort. So I would say that, but it will go down to what the building looks like and feels like. It will be about the quality of your communications out. So if you're a large church and your social media, your website presence is poor, if communication isn't clear there, you're in real trouble.
Yeah, again, it's all about paying attention regularly to kind of everything as a church planner or the lead pastor.
I will talk later about pathways. So not so much aesthetics, but you need to have effective pathways and systems.
Great.
Something that's really that you shouldn't attend to. So if you're spending all your time during the week designing an effective integration pathway for your church of 20, you're not spending your time where you need to spend it, because people just connect organically. But as it gets bigger, you absolutely need to invest in that.
Really helpful. Rick asks, how much are church leadership structures impacted by the different size groups?
Well, I want to say in the next section that you and the team immediately around you are most likely the bottleneck for why church isn't growing. That's the bad news. And you and the group around you need to change how you spend your time, what you value, and you need to grow and leave behind an old role for a new role and learn new skills. So it will change some structures and you'll need to divest things off, but it's really about changing who those leaders are as well. In terms of structures, I can tell you here, we've got 12 small groups. We have someone who's 50% on staff who looks after our small groups and our small group leaders. They've hit the wall because they do a great job, but by the time they get around to each of those groups and meet with a leadership team once a week, it's 12 weeks and they're overdue to get back. So that person's right now recruiting 6 people in our congregation who actually don't lead small groups but know how small groups work. And we're going to say to them, we want to give you each 2 groups to look after. And that person is now going to look after the team of 6, train them, meet with them and equip them so that they can actually support those small group leaders. Now, they can easily do 2. As volunteers, they could probably do 4 and meet with them once every 2 months or every term. So we're actually over-engineering for the size we are, because what's currently working isn't working, and we need to think about what's the quantum leap. What's a structure that will work for us when we go from 12 groups to 24 groups? There's no point restructuring to something that works for 14 groups. That's the chicken curry mindset. We need to think about the quantum leap.
Yeah, keep looking forward. Scott Dunlop asked this question. Any comments on numbers growing, or whether to start another service or change structures or just keep getting larger?
Okay, so Scott, are you asking the question, what do we do if we're not growing? Or are you asking, what's the most effective way to grow? Oh, we got to unmute him. Can you do some sign language for us, Scott? Or maybe we can unmute you, yeah? Yep.
You are growing, and so you're faced with that decision, start another service, or we just got to make some structural changes here to cope for this so that we can keep growing. This
is a tough one everywhere. In terms of, you might just not even have the building, so there's lots of things on.
Yeah, so there'll be some logistical limitations, like building. If you're hiring a building and you've got it in the morning, and when you make the inquiry, they're not going to give it to you in the evening, it becomes a simpler question. And you're not, the size of the room. If you've reached capacity in the space you are, and there's nowhere else there's nowhere else that's bigger, then you probably want to start planning smaller churches. You don't want to wait till you're at capacity. Before you get to 80%, you need to be asking that kind of question. But it will be a strategic question about your area as well. So our first church plant was in the Blackdown Mount Druitt area. My take on the culture of the context was people would never come to a large thing. It felt like we hit the Dunbar effect at about 50. And so in that kind of context, you want to keep planting and planting rather than get bigger. Where we are in the city, our sense is that a bigger thing would actually work, and we're not in any hurry to plant, a kilometre away from where we are now, partly because we think people, the bigger it gets, the more it'll actually connect with the culture of city people. But also, we've got a big building, and even if we wanted to church plant somewhere, there are very few spaces that will rent out to churches in the CBD, and we certainly couldn't buy anything. So it'll be partly your pragmatics, but partly ask the question, what's going to work for the kind of cultural context I'm in? I know, is that kind of answering what you're saying, Scott?
Yeah, it's just something I've got to think through. I mean, churches that I've led in the past have had multiple services. We're growing and we can actually just keep getting larger. We've got, capacity to do that. But yes, I just need to think through, keep getting bigger in the one service or, where there's a stage where you go to two. But yeah, thinking about the culture, that's probably helpful.
Yeah, you probably want to, it's such an individualised question, you probably want to get a Reach Australia consultation to come in and answer that question. But one thing that I'd say is, in the city, people come to the city because they value the city centre, because they value diversity and they like a diverse community. In small country towns, people love their country town because it's a wide diversity as well. So they know people who are old and young, and you go to the pictures and there's lots of different age groups. In the suburbs, people say, I love my suburb because everyone's just like me. So we're all got kids the same age at primary school or high school, or we've all just retired, or we're all just buying our first home. I love my suburb because everyone's like me. In the suburbs, multiple services work because you put the young couples who haven't had a child yet together, single workers, you put you segment off and people love it. In the suburbs, that's really worked for us, right? But my observation is that it hasn't worked in city churches where it's been tried. And I don't think that actually works in more rural, small community contexts either. But that's not my area of expertise. So happy for someone to push back on me if they think that's not right.